The colony ship Ardent Hope had been drifting for 11 years when the dragons found it. Not metaphorical dragons. Not aliens shaped like something familiar. Real dragons, creatures of scale and fire and ancient intelligence, each one the size of a city block, their wings folding light itself into shadow when they passed overhead. The Dracari they called themselves. They had no word for humanity because, until 11 years ago, they had no reason to. The ship carried 4,200 survivors from Earth's third continent collapse. They had launched with hope and landed, if drifting past a gas giant counted as landing, with grief. Supplies were stretched. Children had been born into darkness. And the colony had learned, slowly and painfully, that silence was the safest language in space. No one understood that lesson better than Marin Cole. He was 17. Broad-shouldered for his age, with hands too large for his frame and eyes that moved like a man reading a room rather than a boy living in one. He hadn't spoken a word in 9 years. Not since the night the fire took his mother, and his voice left with her, as though it decided it had nothing left worth saying. People had stopped trying. Teachers logged him as nonverbal and moved on. Colony administrators marked him as low priority. Other teenagers kept their distance, not out of cruelty mostly but because silence made people uncomfortable. It reminded them of space itself. Marin communicated through a battered tablet, typing short sentences. Yes. No. I understand. Move left. He was remarkably good at being invisible. That changed the morning the Dracari ship descended. It came without warning, a vessel the color of volcanic rock, shaped like a fist closing around something fragile. It matched the Ardent Hope's drift exactly, then stopped. No communication. No signal. Just presence. The kind of presence that needed no introduction. Commander Yeva Strauss, a former naval officer with iron-gray hair and a jaw built for hard decisions, assembled her senior staff in the bridge. Marin wasn't on the senior staff. He wasn't on any staff. But he was in the ventilation corridor above the bridge. He spent most of his free hours in the ship's forgotten spaces, and he heard everything. They've been scanning us for 40 minutes, said Chief Engineer Doss. Deep scans. Biological, structural, psychological, whatever their tech does. Are they hostile? Strauss asked. Unknown. They haven't fired. They also haven't left. Attempts at communication? 14. All formats. No response. Marin pressed his back against the cold metal of the corridor and stared at the ceiling. He had a habit of thinking in patterns, mechanical sequences, cause in effect, the logic of broken things. His mother had called it a gift. Everyone else called it strange. He thought about the scans. 40 minutes of biological scanning. That wasn't aggression. That was evaluation. They were looking for something specific. He climbed down from the corridor and made his way to Observation Deck C, a small, rarely used room with a direct viewport to the stars. The Dracari vessel filled most of it. Up close it wasn't just large. It was alive in some way he couldn't name. The scales on its hull moved. Slowly like breathing. Marin pressed his hand flat against the viewport glass. He didn't know why he did it. It was instinct, the same instinct that made him fix broken things before anyone asked him to. The ship responded. A single light, deep amber, warm as firelight, pulsed from the center of the Dracari vessel. Once. Twice. Then it held steady, aimed directly at Observation Deck C. Aimed directly at him. His tablet buzzed. He hadn't typed anything. The screen filled with a single line of text, not from any ship system he recognized, rendered in perfect, clean English. We have been searching for the Quiet One. We did not expect to find him so young. Marin stared at the words for a long time. Then he typed back, hands steady. What do you want? The response came in under 3 seconds. We want what your people cannot give us. We want what only you carry. We want the unspoken word, and the war that depends on it. The amber light pulsed again. Outside the viewport, the dragon ship slowly began to open. The Dracari called their leader the Vorith. It entered the Ardent Hope through a docking seal that hadn't existed 30 seconds before its arrival. The dragon ship simply grew a connection point, biological and mechanical at once, sealing to the colony ship's hull with a sound like a giant exhaling. Commander Strauss had armed every available crew member. 14 people total. Against a creature that stood 4 meters tall and radiated heat like an engine left running. The Vorith didn't flinch at the weapons. It looked past them immediately, scanning the gathered crew with vertical pupils the color of molten copper. Then it spoke, not in any transmitted language, but directly into the room's air, its voice a low harmonic that Marin felt in his ribs rather than heard with his ears. Where is the Silent One? Strauss stepped forward. I'm Commander Yeva Strauss. I speak for this vessel and its people. Whatever you need, you negotiate with me. The Vorith regarded her the way a mountain regards weather. You are not silent. You cannot help us. It looked past her again. The silent one. Bring him. Marin was already in the corridor outside the docking bay. He hadn't been summoned. He had come because the logic of the situation demanded it. The message on his tablet had been sent to him, not to Strauss, not to the ship's system. Whatever this was, it had started with him. He stepped through the door. The Vorith turned immediately. Something shifted in its expression, recognition and something older than relief. There, it said quietly. The word carrier. Strauss moved between them. He's a miner and a civilian. Whatever you think he is. He is the only reason we did not destroy your ship 11 years ago. The Vorith's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. We detected his pattern at birth. We have been tracking the Ardent Hope across 4-star systems. We waited until he was old enough to understand what we are about to ask. The room went very still. Marin typed on his tablet and held it up. Ask. The Vorith studied the tablet, then looked at Marin with something that might have been respect. There is a war. Not yours, older than your species. The Drakari have fought the Nullborn for 6,000 years. The Nullborn do not want territory or resources. They want silence, permanent, total silence. They consume sound, language, memory. Every civilization they reach is erased. Not destroyed. Erased. As though it never existed. Chief Engineer Doss muttered something under his breath. Strauss silenced him with a look. The Vorith continued. 300 years ago, our seers identified a convergence point. A moment when the Nullborn's advance could be permanently severed. It required a specific resonance. A frequency of consciousness we call the unspoken word. It cannot be generated by a mind that uses spoken language. The neural pathways are overwritten by speech too early in development. It paused. A being who stops speaking before full cognitive maturity, whose mind learns to process meaning without sound, develops a different kind of architecture. One capable of generating the resonance. Marin's hands had stopped moving over the tablet. You, the Vorith said, are the only being in this region of space who qualifies. We have checked every species within 40 light-years. You are singular. Strauss's voice was careful and controlled. What exactly are you asking him to do? Travel with us to the threshold, the point of convergence. Allow our engineers to amplify the resonance his mind naturally produces. Transmit it across the Nullborn's advanced line. The Vorith looked at Marin. It will take courage. The Nullborn will detect the transmission and target its source. Marin typed, will it kill me? The Vorith was quiet for 3 full seconds. Honesty, Marin realized, cost the creature something. It may, it said. We do not know. No one has done this before. Marin looked around the room. Strauss with her soldier's jaw and frightened eyes. Doss gripping a weapon he couldn't use. The rest of the crew, people who had been born into loss, who had spent 11 years surviving on the edge of nothing, who had never asked to be here and never stopped trying anyway. 4,000 people on this ship. Billions erased by the Nullborn across 6,000 years. He thought about his mother. About the night she died in the fire, and how he had screamed until his voice simply gave out and never came back. How silence had felt at first like a wound. And then, slowly, like a room he learned to live in. And then, eventually, like something else entirely. Like a gift he hadn't understood yet. He typed one word and held up the tablet. Yes. The interior of the Drakari vessel was nothing like Marin expected. He had expected metal and machinery, the cold logic of technology. What he found instead was something between a cathedral and a living creature. The walls breathed. Slowly, rhythmically, the bioluminescent panels along each corridor pulsed with light that shifted from amber to deep violet depending on what part of the ship he passed through. The floors were warm underfoot. The air tasted faintly of ozone and something sweeter he couldn't name. Commander Strauss had insisted on accompanying him. The Vorith had permitted it, one human escort, no weapons. Strauss had agreed without hesitation, which told Marin everything about her character. A Drakari engineer named Sarek guided them through the ship's inner passages. Sarek was smaller than the Vorith, perhaps 3 meters tall, and moved with a precision that reminded Marin of the way very intelligent people moved in tight spaces, economically, deliberately, never wasting motion. The threshold is 14 hours at full drive, Sarek said. We will begin your preparation immediately. What does preparation involve? Strauss asked. Mapping. We need to understand the architecture of his cognition before we attempt amplification. Every word carrier's resonance pattern is unique. If we miscalibrate, the transmission will scatter and accomplish nothing. Marin typed, "Or harm me." Sarek looked at the tablet, then at Marin directly. "Yes. Or harm you." The mapping chamber was a circular room near the ship's center, the deepest, most protected part of the vessel. It was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like sound itself had agreed to stay out. In the middle of the room sat a single seat made of something that looked like obsidian but gave slightly under pressure, like it was designed to hold rather than simply support. Marin sat. Sarek placed both hands flat on the armrests, not restraining, just connecting, and closed his eyes. A low hum began, subsonic, felt rather than heard. The bioluminescent panel shifted to a deep, steady blue. Strauss stood at the room's edge and said nothing. She was watching Marin the way soldiers watched each other before something dangerous. Not with pity but with the specific respect of someone who understood what was being asked. The mapping took 4 hours. Marin sat still. He was good at still. During those 4 hours he thought about what the Vorath had said. The Nullborn consumed language and memory, erased civilizations as though they had never existed. He tried to imagine it. A species simply gone. Not dead, which left remains. Gone. Not even grief left behind because there was no one who remembered them to grieve. He thought about his mother. How the thing that terrified him most about losing her wasn't the loss itself. It was forgetting. The specific way she said his name. The sound of her laugh. He was 17. He knew memory was unreliable. He knew in 30 years the details would blur. The Nullborn didn't blur. They deleted. When Sarek finally lifted his hands, his expression was unreadable for a moment. Then it settled into something Marin recognized, the look of someone who has just discovered a problem they hadn't anticipated. "What?" Strauss said immediately. "His resonance is stronger than any pattern we have previously recorded." Sarek chose words carefully. "By a significant margin." "That's good," Strauss said. "It means the transmission will reach further than calculated. It could sever the Nullborn's advance line entirely, not just at the convergence point, but across their full front." Sarek paused. "It also means the Nullborn will detect the signal at much greater range. They will have more time to respond. More time to target me," Marin typed. "Yes." Strauss stepped forward. "Then we find a way to shield him during transmission." An alert tone cut through the ship. Not an alarm, something lower, more serious. The kind of sound that preceded bad news in any language. The Vorath's voice came through the walls themselves. "The Nullborn have altered course. They are moving toward the threshold." Pause. "They detected the mapping signal. They know we are here." Marin felt the ship accelerate beneath him, a deep, pressing force as the Drakari vessel pushed toward its maximum drive. Sarek looked at Marin. "We now have 6 hours. Not 14. Marin nodded once. He typed, "Then we use 6. Sarek studied him for a long moment. "You are not afraid." Marin considered this honestly. Then he typed, "I'm terrified. But fear and action aren't the same thing." Sarek was quiet. Then, very slowly, the Drakari engineer lowered his head. The Drakari gesture, Marin would later learn, for something between salute and reverence. "No," Sarek said softly. "They are not." Outside the viewport, the stars had begun to look different, stretched, compressed, rearranged by speed. Ahead, at the edge of scanner range, something vast and lightless was moving toward them. The Nullborn were coming. And Marin Cole, the boy no one had heard speak in 9 years, was the only thing standing in their way. The threshold looked like a wound in space. Marin had expected something dramatic. A gate, a structure, something built. Instead it was an absence. A region of space where light behaved differently, where the stars behind it seemed to dim slightly, as though the universe itself was holding its breath at the boundary. The Drakari ship dropped out of full drive and slowed to a crawl, positioning precisely at the geometric center of the phenomenon. Around them, the Nullborn fleet emerged from darkness. They didn't move like ships. They moved like weather, spreading, filling space with a slow, patient inevitability. Each Nullborn vessel was black in a way that wasn't simply dark. It was the color of absence, of things that had been removed. They produced no light, no signal, no sound. They simply advanced. 47 units, Sarek reported. They are not weapons ready. They are observing. They're waiting to see if we actually do it, Strauss said. Yes. If we begin transmission they will move to suppress. Simultaneously. All 47. Marin was already seated in the transmission chair. A different seat than the mapping chair, larger, positioned at the exact center of the ship's amplification array. Dozens of Drakari engineers moved around him with quiet urgency, adjusting systems, checking readings, communicating in their harmonic language that Marin felt more than heard. The Vorith stood before him. Its copper eyes were steady. Once we begin, it said, we cannot stop. The transmission must reach full resonance or it will accomplish nothing. Partial resonance may actually strengthen the Nullborn's ability to locate and suppress future attempts. It paused. This is the only attempt that will ever be possible. If it fails, there will be no second. Marin nodded. You understand that during transmission, the amplification array will be the most detectable object in this region of space. The Nullborn will close immediately. The Vorith's voice was level, honest, relentless. Our ship's defense systems will hold as long as they can. Our engineers have calculated. Marin typed, don't tell me the odds. They won't change what I'm about to do. The Vorith stopped. Looked at him for a long moment. Then very quietly, no. They will not. Commander Strauss appeared at Marin's left side. She looked at the Nullborn fleet filling the viewport, then back at him. Her jaw was set, but her eyes were doing something more complicated. You know, she said, I have given orders that sent people into danger. I have watched good people make hard choices. She stopped. I want you to know that I see you. Not a tool. Not a signal. You. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder, not long, not dramatic, just present. Whatever happens. Marin looked at her. He reached for his tablet, then set it down. He didn't type anything. He simply nodded. Sometimes that was enough. Sarek's voice came across the system. Array at full readiness. Awaiting your signal. Marin closed his eyes. He thought about silence. Not the silence of absence. He'd spent 9 years learning the difference. True silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was every word he'd never said, compressed into something denser and more honest than speech. It was the conversation he'd had with his mother the night before the fire, sitting on the floor of their cabin without saying anything because nothing needed saying. It was the understanding that passed between people who had learned to exist in the same space without filling it with noise. He thought about what the Nullborn erased. Not just sound, meaning. The living record of consciousness. Every civilization deleted was a silence of a different kind. The silence of things that had been and were now pretending they had never existed. He thought, no. Not out loud. He didn't need out loud. He opened something in himself that he had never tried to open before. The room behind the silence, the place where language lived before it became words. He had been in that room for 9 years without understanding what it was. Now he understood. It was exactly what the Drakari had called it. The unspoken word. Not a word at all. A frequency. A resonance of consciousness that said, we are here. We existed. We persist. You cannot erase us. The amplification array activated. The Nullborn fleet moved. 47 vessels accelerated simultaneously, closing from every direction. The Drakari defense systems engaged, barriers of light and force that Marin felt as pressure against his skin. Sarek's voice cut through the noise, transmission at 12%, 30-58. Something struck the ship. Art. The lights flickered. An engineer went down. Marin didn't open his eyes. 73%, 80-89. Another impact. Worse. The warm walls of the ship went briefly cold. Strauss's voice, very controlled. Hold. Hold. Marin held. He thought about his mother. He thought about 4,200 people on the Ardent Hope who had survived 11 years on the edge of nothing. He thought about 6,000 years of civilizations erased, and the silence they left behind that wasn't peaceful. It was just hollow. He thought, not anymore. 97, 99. The frequency reached its peak. Marin released it. The silence after was different from any silence Marin had ever known. It lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then every system on the Drakari ship came back online simultaneously, not crashing back to life but returning steadily like something that had been paused, pressing play again. The bioluminescent panels resumed their amber pulse. The warm hum of the vessel's living infrastructure rebuilt itself around him. Marin opened his eyes. The viewport was clear. The Nullborn fleet was gone. Not destroyed, gone in the way that the Nullborn themselves made things gone. Absent, as though the space they had occupied had simply forgotten they were there. Marin didn't know if that was poetic justice or just physics. He suspected it was both. Sarek stood 3 meters away, staring at his instruments with an expression that Drakari faces were apparently not designed to make. The expression of someone whose calculations have been exceeded in a direction they hadn't planned for. Full transmission, Sarek said quietly. Resonance propagated across the entire advance line. The Nullborn's front, all of it, not just the convergence point, has collapsed. He looked up. All of it. The Voritha's voice came through the walls. Slower than usual. Waited. 6,000 years. That was all it said. Commander Strauss let out a breath she had clearly been holding since the first impact. She looked at Marin the way people look at things they expected to lose and didn't, with a relief so large it came out as stillness rather than noise. Are you hurt? She asked. Marin did an internal inventory. He was exhausted in a way that had no word he knew, not tired, not drained, but as though something had moved through him at speed and left the channel it carved behind. His hands were steady. His thinking was clear. He shook his head. Sarek crossed to him. The Drakari engineer crouched to eye level, an unusual thing for a species that didn't typically lower itself, and studied Marin's face with genuine, unguarded curiosity. What was it like? Sarek asked. The moment of transmission. What did it feel like from inside? Marin reached for his tablet. He paused. He set the tablet down. He opened his mouth, and for the first time in 9 years, Marin Cole made a sound. Not a word yet. Just a sound. The rough, unpracticed shape of a voice that had gone unused, that had to remember what air and intention felt like when they worked together. Strauss went very still. He tried again. The sound was imperfect, cracked at the edges, the way a door sounds when it's been closed too long and the wood has settled. But it was there. He stopped. The word had edges he wasn't used to. He breathed through it. Like remembering something you never forgot. The words came out slowly. Imprecise. But present. Sarek stared at him. Strauss made a sound of her own. Not a word, just the thing that happens to people when they've been holding something back long enough and the reason to hold it disappears. Marin looked at his hands. He turned them over, looking at the palms the way you look at something ordinary that has just revealed it was extraordinary all along. He had spent 9 years communicating in text and gesture and silence. He had built an entire internal world where words weren't spoken, where meaning lived in a different architecture. That world wasn't gone. He didn't think it ever would be. But the door apparently still worked. He just hadn't needed it until now. The Vorith entered the transmission chamber. All 4 meters of it, filling the doorway, copper eyes moving to Marin immediately. It crossed the room and stopped before him, looking down with an expression that carried the weight of 6,000 years, finally setting something down. You have done what no being in recorded history has done, the Vorith said. Marin thought about this. Then he said carefully in his new old voice, I didn't do it alone. The Vorith regarded him. No, you did not. It paused. Your species is remarkable. We have monitored many. Most fight with strength or weapons or numbers. Another pause. You fight with the part of yourself you almost lost. Marin nodded slowly. The ardent hope was waiting. 4,200 people who didn't know yet what had happened, who had spent the last 6 hours not knowing if their only escort was going to return. Marin thought about going back. About walking through those corridors, the ones he knew better than anyone because he'd spent years in the spaces nobody else used, and having to explain. He thought about how the explanation was going to sound coming out of his mouth instead of appearing on a screen. He almost smiled. Can we go home? He asked Strauss. She looked at him, at his face, at his mouth, at the words coming out of it, and the relief that came over her then was the uncomplicated kind. The kind that doesn't need analysis or context. Yeah, she said. Let's go home. The Drakari vessel turned. The threshold fell behind them, just a wound in space again, but a quieter one now, a scar instead of an open cut. Ahead, somewhere in the dark, the ardent hope was waiting with its 4,200 survivors and its 11 years of grief and its stubborn, unremarkable human persistence. Marin sat in the corridor outside the docking bay, one of his old spaces, the familiar dark, and waited for the ships to connect. He didn't type anything. He didn't need to. He sat in the silence he had always known, and for the first time, it felt complete. Not because he had added something to it, but because he finally understood what it had always been holding. Not absence. Not a wound. A room where the most important things lived until the moment they were needed. He had spoken today. He would speak again. But the silence had saved the world. And that was more than enough. The end. He never spoke a word, until the dragon called his name, a DracoWar original HFY story. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying something the rest of the world isn't ready for yet.